لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون فما يكذبك بعد بالدين أليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين صدق الله العلي العظيم. Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We don't have much time, so we'll very quickly move on to today's session. Just a continuation of last session. We started going through the book called Jannatul Quran, and we were going through the rules to do with tajweed and to do with noon of sakin. I've got the help of a whiteboard today, so we should be slightly easier to explain a few things. Is the PowerPoint available? Yes. If it is, it's slightly easy, otherwise we'll still carry on. Okay, so we mentioned that a noon, there's three ways that we see a noon generally. A noon at the start of a word is obviously like this, as you're all aware. Noon in the middle, generally like that. And a noon at the end is obviously like this. Now when this noon has a sakin, it generally has the symbol which looks like the head of a heart sometimes, the head of the letter heart. It's a little sort of semicircle symbol at the top of the noon. And then we also mentioned tanween. Again, there's two ways of writing tanween. I think two ways of writing tanween. One way is like this, two parallel lines exactly on top of each other at the top, which makes the sound an. Two parallel lines at the bottom of a word. This represents any word, just like hangman, and that makes the sound in. And then a sort of dhamma symbol with this semicircle on top of it, and that makes the sound on. So this is one set of tanweens. The other set of tanween, another way you may see them in the Quran, and we'll go through the differences in a minute, is where the two sort of double fathas on top are slightly slanted. So they're slightly not on top of each other, but slightly further apart. Again, and that again makes the sound an. This one again in, two slanted at the bottom, and then the other one is two dhammas. Instead of a semicircle, there's another small dhamma, and this is the on sound. Okay, so we mentioned that whenever we see a noon sakin, there's generally 4 rules. One of 4 things that generally happen. We mentioned idhar. And idhar, basically, the meaning of the word idhar means to make it clear. So the sound of that noon or the sound of that tanween, even a tanween is basically a noon. So that noon you pronounce fully is basically pronounced as it is. Now, when do you see idhar? When does idhar happen? Idhar happens after the letters that we can see there. So whether these are generally the throat letters, the letters that are pronounced through the throat. We've got the letter a, hamza. We've got ha, ayn, ha, ghain, and kha. These are the throat letters. So whenever we have a noon of sakin and after it we have one of these letters, we fully pronounce the noon. Very straightforward. And when this happens, we did mention this last week, we said whenever this happens, we always see this set of tanweens. For tanweens that are idhar, they will always be this set of tanweens. So the shape is quite clear. And whenever the noon is actually physically has that sakin on top, you fully pronounce it. So that's the sign to know not to go into the other sort of 3 rules. You know that it's basically idhar. Sometimes when you don't have the sakin, it sort of slightly changes things, and we'll come on to that in a minute. I think, yeah. So these are just basic examples. As you can see, it's basically different positions, different letters of that noon or that tanween. So in this one, after the noon, we look at the letter. After the noon is a hamza. We said the hamza is one of the halbi words. So as we expect, this noon has a sakin sign on top of it, and obviously it means that we fully need to fully pronounce it. So the 2 signs is 1 that you could see that symbol, sakin symbol, and 2 the letter after it. It's difficult to always look at the letter after it. So for idhar, you can just basically, as soon as you see that symbol, you know you need to fully pronounce that noon. So that would be wayan'awna. This is an example where the noon of sakin is in the middle of a word. An example where a noon of sakin is in a different word. So we've got the word min with a sakin, and then the letter after the sakin in a different word, in the next word is alif, not alif, alf. So the word is alf, the letter is alif, which means because it's coming after a noon, this noon will have a sakin on top of it, and it would be the idhar rule. So you basically pronounce that noon fully. Example of a tanween. Tanween is never in the middle of a word, it's always at the end of a word. So if you're reading this continuously and you're not stopping, which is what we expect to do, it would be kufu wan ahad. We fully pronounce that wan, the an sound, because the word after starts with the letter alif, which alif basically here is hamza. And this hamza, again, like we said, is a part of it's an example of a noon, which after it comes the letter hamza. So it's got examples for every one of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. The word ha, when after the noon there's a ha, anho, you fully pronounce it. If it's in a different word, at the beginning of a different word, you see the ha, and the word before it ends with a sakin noon. Very, very straightforward. You really know this. We don't need to, we don't need to constantly repeat it. But it would be in huwa. Example of a tanween. We mentioned this set of tanween. This is the symbol for the un sign. Salamun here, which we see at the end of Surah Fajr. Salamun here hatta matla' al-fajr. And Amta, Surah Al-Hamd, you always pronounce the noon as you expect. Okay, so I'm not going to go through them, it's quite easy. So if you want to have a look at the examples, or if you're not sure about the examples, let me know, but you'd see it in the book. I'll try to ask the Sheikh to send the PDF. If not, speak to the Sheikh afterwards or to myself, and I can send the PDF of the book that we're basically going through. Let's move on to the next one, which is idgham. Now when it comes to idgham, the word idgham means to merge. So we merge either the two words together or the letters together, and we'll go through it now. There's two types of idgham, if I'm correct. Yeah. So there's idgham with ghunna and idgham without ghunna. I think once and for all it's very important to understand the word ghunna. The word ghunna is the sound that comes from the nasal cavity. It's generally quite prominent with when you pronounce the letters noon and mim. The word ghunna itself, ghunna, if you actually make that sound, you would see that there's a bit of a what do you call it? A bit of a movement on the letter noon in the nasal cavity. You should be able to hear the word ghunna when you pronounce it. Ghunna. That sound is basically the sound that's in the nose. And I think it's important because ghunna gets repeated quite a number of times in tajweed. So it's important to know what we mean by ghunna. Ghunna is basically that sound within that nasal cavity. It could be it could be a number of letters. It could even be the letter ya, for example. That, I know most of it is through the mouth. Most of ya comes through the open cavity of the mouth, but that particular part of it which you can sort of hear through the nose, that is referred to as ghunna. So ghunna is purely just that sound. And like I say, it could show itself in ya, it could show itself in noon, it could show itself in mim, and we'll come on to the letters which you can see it in. So idgham, which means to merge, happens. There's two examples: idgham with ghunna, idgham without ghunna. If a nun sakin or tanween comes at the end of a word and is followed by any of the 6 letters, which we'll mention, then the nun sakin or the tanween will be merged. Okay, so like we said, if there's a nun sakin or a tanween, and after that nun sakin or a tanween is one of the halaqi letters, ayn, kha, ha, then we fully pronounce it. In this example of merging, idgham, when it's the following letters, which is, these letters are ya, ra, mim, lam, wav, and noon. 6 letters, yeah? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these letters, if they come after a noon of a sakin or a tanween, then they would merge together. We'll show you how it merges, and I think most people already know it. The difficulty comes in sort of rule 3 and rule number 4. Those become slightly more tricky. But this one most people know. Idhar everybody knows, idgham most people know, and you automatically sort of pronounce it the way you should anyway. Okay. So basically you don't pronounce that noon. That's how it merges. The noon gets deleted and then the next letter becomes a tashdid. We'll show you in examples. Okay, idgham with ghunna. We mentioned that idgham happens with 6 letters. These letters were ya, ra, mim, lam, wav, and noon. Doesn't make any particular sense in terms of the meaning of the word, but when you put them together, it makes the word yarmalun. That's how we normally learn it, just by learning that particular phrase, which doesn't mean anything, and then all of the letters in that phrase are your idgham letters. Now for idgham with ghunna, this has come up with the phrase yanmu, which I'm not particularly fond of because it doesn't mean anything to me. I think it's easier to work with this and just to drop the lam and the ra, which don't happen with idgham with ghunna. So if I was to go through idgham with ghunna, I would say they would be the letters ya, mim, Vav and Noon, which make up the word Yamun. Like I say, they don't actually mean anything, but you could probably learn them easier if you just learn the phrase. Yar Malun. Yar Malun for all of Idgham, which we said divides into two, with Ghunna and without Ghunna. With Ghunna, the word Yamun, these letters. So when we have a Noon Sakin, I'll go through the text and then we'll go through an example. Just another few minutes. If the Noon Sakin or the Tanween is followed by any of these four letters, the reciter should make Idgham with Ghunna. Ghunna being that sound in that nasal cavity. Method of pronunciation: skip the Noon or the Tanween and pronounce the following letter with Ghunna from the nasal cavity. Okay, so the first difference, well, the main difference between this and Idhar, which was the first rule, like we mentioned, is Idhar has this symbol, the Sakin symbol. In Yarmalu, in Idgham, you don't actually see that Sakin. If you look at the Quran, you don't see that Sakin on top of the letter, on top of the Noon. And your Tanweens will not be in this format. Your Tanweens will all be in this particular format, whenever there's Yarmalu. Doesn't mean that if you see this, or if it doesn't have a Sakin, that it's always Idgham. It could be other rules as well. But if you don't see them, it's a sign for you to check whether you need to do Yarmalun. So first stage is you don't see the Sakin, you use these sets of Tanweens. The next stage is the actual letter, so you check what letter comes after. A lot of the time there's a tashdid on the next letter, which also helps you perform it, and we'll say how. Can I just mention reading from the Quran? I probably should have mentioned this in the first session. Try to read from the Uthman Taha writing of the Quran. It's the green books. I can see one there. Our traditional Farsi and Pakistani books, they have different writings, and when you talk about standard tajweed and you try to go through standard way of reciting, those books are different. So the Sakins, you might see the Sakins as circles instead of this sort of symbol here. It's better to always stick to Uthman Taha books if you can, and that's the basis of what we would teach tajweed off. That's the sort of standard, and then everything else is, they come in different variations. Okay, just another 1 or 2 minutes and we'll end it. Okay, so very important to basically look at these words. What did we say? We said there's a Noon, which could be a Sakin. It wouldn't have the symbol of a Sakin on top, like we mentioned. The next letter, which in this case is in the next word, is Wav, and Wav is part of the letters of Yamun, which we mentioned. So we know that in this case we need to perform Idgham with Ghunna. Idgham with Ghunna is very straightforward. As you pronounce that Wav, you would hear that sort of nasally sound in the nasal cavity. Important bit is drop the Noon, don't pronounce the Noon, and you join the Mim to the Wav. Now this does say there's no tashdid, but I disagree with this. The way it's pronounced, you would clearly hear a tashdid, so it does have a tashdid. So it wouldn't become mewajidkum, it would become mewajidkum. So but you're basically replacing that Noon with another letter of that. So this would be Wav, this would be Wav, two Wavs become a tashdid, mewajdikum, sorry, not wajidkum, mewajdikum. Okay, so that Noon gets dropped because there's a Wav. Wav is part of the Yamun letters, and it becomes a tashdid, mewajidkum. And as you pronounce that, you should hopefully hear some of that Wav within that nasal cavity. I think we can stop there. Next week we'll go through the examples of other Tanweens, other letters, of Yamun, and inshallah we'll carry on. Is there any particular questions? Okay, finish with the last salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.